Just to let everyone know, in about 1 hour or so, we're going to be joined by Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game, and we're getting into that time of year where there are a lot of questions about hunting. We've got some questions for him, too, about the possibility of wolves in Cassia County. There's a story out, too, as well about the state getting involved along with some environmental officials and relocating some bears because no zoos wanted them. I guess the zoos figured they already had their full allotment. So that's coming up in the next hour of the program. We've got a couple of guests coming by talking with us in a few minutes about a sale that they're involved with in Filer, which is done to benefit artisans, that is craftsmen and women around the world who perhaps are making just a small amount of money, maybe even a few dollars a day in their own hometowns. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be a sale coming up later this week in Filer at the Mennonite Church, and that's designed to try and put some more money in the pockets of some of these people and improve their lives. That's on the way in just a few minutes. But first, I got to share with you that this controversy over what's going on in the Bowe Bergdahl case is really getting the liberals angry that anyone would even question the upcoming decision to set Bergdahl free. It's 8 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 45. On our way today into the upper 70s and maybe even 80 tomorrow. The New York Times, the Bible of American liberalism, has this today. Senator John McCain, chairman of the committee that oversees promotions of senior military commanders, said that Sergeant Bergdahl was clearly a deserter and that he would convene a hearing if the sergeant was not punished. Mr. McCain's statement drew a sharp rebuke on Monday from Sergeant Bergdahl's lawyer, partly because the four-star Army general who will ultimately decide the fate of Sergeant Bergdahl is considered likely someday to face a hearing for his next job before Mr. McCain's committee. Do you think that perhaps there may be some people, military officers, who are more political than, let's say, military? There was a great story I remember hearing one time, way back in the late 1950s, and going into the 1960 election, you had a number of military officers who were going before congressional panels testifying that the United States lagged way behind the Soviet Union in missiles. They called it the missile gap. Some of you are old enough to remember that was a hugely contentious issue in the 1960 presidential election. And it frosted the outgoing president, Dwight Eisenhower, to no end because Eisenhower and his vice president, Richard Nixon, knew that the gap actually existed the other way around, that we had far more missiles than the Soviets did. Nixon couldn't bring that up, though, for national security reasons at debates, and he was being fried by Kennedy. Kennedy was saying that we're falling behind and we need to remedy this right away. Kennedy was relying on the testimony of the generals. Eisenhower knew most of those generals because most of them had been his junior officers less than a decade and a half before when they were fighting a war in Europe. And he once told an aide, he was so miffed at what they were doing, he said, these guys, talking about national security, is baloney. He said they would all trade a brigade for another star on their shoulders. We've got perhaps a little of that going on because jail time for Bergdahl would mean a tremendous embarrassment for the President of the United States, who had Bergdahl released in exchange for 5 Taliban cutthroats, and then had a White House ceremony where he celebrated Bergdahl as an American hero, which it appears he is anything but. Last night, on a program called The Kelly File on the Fox News Channel, Shannon Bream sitting in for Megyn Kelly, speaking with presidential candidate Mike Huckabee on this issue. Huckabee, like John McCain, is willing to give the military an earful.
Here now, presidential candidate Governor Mike Huckabee. All right, Governor, your reaction to how this is now unfolding?
Bergdahl was a traitor. He was a deserter. And under the rules of the United States military, if you desert in the course of combat, you could face even up to the death sentence, which probably would have been handed to him in World War II. Here's another problem. We gave away 5 of the top Taliban leaders for this one guy who's a deserter. And by the way, the President of the United States broke the law when he did that because the law requires 30 days notice to the members of Congress. He gave only a few days to Senator Dianne Feinstein. So there's a lot here, and I don't think this story ought to be over just because Bergdahl gets a slap on the wrist and maybe discharged. He should be dishonorably discharged. This should come to full circle. And I think some higher-ups in the military have a lot to answer for. It's apparent that they're politicizing this and they don't want to offend the White House. That ought to be troubling to everybody.
It's also troubling because I have a friend who's currently still serving with the U.S. Army. He's in Alaska, or leaving Alaska now, being transferred out of there. He served in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And I've had multiple conversations in the past with him about the direction the military is going. He's made the rank of colonel, probably someday could be a general, perhaps someday could be one of the country's top generals. He wants nothing more to do with it. He's going to get his 20 in shortly, and then he's going home. He had a dream of perhaps doing 30 years or more. No longer. I've talked to a friend of mine who's now retired from the Army and living in Hawaii, who told me that what he saw happening over the last several years in the military was absolutely disgusting. He explained that when he first joined back in the 1990s, he said there were a lot of guys like him from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who wanted to go out and do the right thing because they were patriotic Americans. And he said what happened over the course of the next 15, 20 years, he said they started bringing in his words, quote, gangbangers, unquote, and putting them into uniform. And he said they were quickly becoming what you might call a palace guard, a Praetorian guard for President Obama. And he said that officers were getting promoted simply because they were willing to do what Mr. Obama wanted them to do, and it had nothing to do with what was going on the battlefield. This is the same White House that humiliated one of the greatest commanders this country has seen in the last probably 30 years. That was General David Petraeus. They did it to General Stanley McChrystal as well, because he spoke out and he told the truth about what was actually going on. I had a message from a friend who served 20 years in the U.S. Air Force, attaining the rank of lieutenant colonel, and he is telling me that this is just absolutely disgusting what's going on. I've talked to some Marines who served in Afghanistan as well, and they tell me the same thing my friend from Hawaii tells me, that the officer corps has been so politicized that the fighting force that we would expect to have has been greatly degraded. Why? Because these issues, if you let Bergdahl walk, this is a terrible blow to the notion of unit cohesion. That's what these men will tell you. If you let him walk, you're telling the people who actually went out looking for him, some of whom were maimed, others died, you're telling their families, it's no big deal. You know, we need to do this so the president saves face. How do you really believe that goes over with the fighting men and women in uniform? It's 8:14. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Telephone number to reach our program today, 736-0300. My email is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, this is quite funny. Friday I was on a job, and there was a new guy working for the contractor that I work sub under. It doesn't matter. And I asked him, we were talking about him. He says, well, I just got back. I was a Marine. I says, well, just let me ask you, how do you feel about what Obama does? He says, nobody that I knew agreed with anything that he did. And there was a General Amos, apparently, who got fired because he disagreed. He says, everybody hates what he's doing, but when you're a soldier, you have no opinion because, you know, you get in trouble for expressing your opinion, especially when you're serving duty. And so he was just about Bergdahl, and he said, I'm furious beyond belief. He says people cannot believe what is going on, but they have to keep their mouth shut.
And that is that's the current, pretty much the current story that I'm hearing. Thank you for the call from various people in various branches of military, either recently retired, recently discharged, or some who were actually serving back in the 60s and 70s and have seen how things, in their view, have been greatly degraded over the course of just the last few decades, but especially accelerated since 2009. And why would any of these people trust Barack Obama? It's still out there, I think, somewhere on YouTube. You can find it on the internet. I happened to be watching it live the day it happened. The president went to speak at a base in North Carolina. Might have been Fort Bragg. Don Lemon was the anchor for CNN. They broke away, and the president was introduced, and there was no applause. And when they cut back to Don Lemon on the set at CNN, you know what Don Lemon said? He said, gee, he said, did anybody else notice that? After that, I heard this from friends in the military. They were telling me that they were instructed when President Obama came. In other words, the applause light went on, and that's when they were supposed to cheer and make a lot of noise because it was embarrassing to Mr. Obama to get that sort of reception, even though it was true. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And what's on your mind?
I think the irony in all this, I don't know if you've heard recently, there was a Green Beret that was dishonorably discharged for standing up for a child who was raped repeatedly by I don't remember if it was Afghani or Iraqi.
Afghan men, yeah. This is a long time trend or a part of their culture where they get these young boys.
Yeah, if the culture's evil, deal with it. I mean, people came to him. He did the right thing, kicked the guy off the military base, and he got dishonorably discharged. While you have Bergdahl, who is a traitor, there is no doubt in anyone's mind, is now getting off scot-free. It doesn't make any sense. Evil is good, good is evil. Politics rules. It's ridiculous.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. Yeah, the folks in Afghanistan said they were told to ignore what was going on. They could hear the screams of these young boys who were chained to beds being raped by these grown Afghan men. And this is an old. This goes back centuries, if not millennia, in that part of the world. They feel that this is something that is their right to do. They purchase these young men, and then they abuse them for many, many years. And then when they're adults, they release them. But then these men live as pariahs, social pariahs in their communities, because they were the victims, but they're treated somehow as if they caused it. And this greatly disturbed the people who were hearing it at the base when it took place. Now, the military denies that they're told to turn a blind eye, but I just referenced a friend of mine serving in the Army up in Alaska a couple of minutes ago, and he told me a story one time that was just curdling. He said that he was told in a seminar, he was with a group of other officers, and they were in a seminar, and it was explained to them, look, if you're in some other part of the world and you walk into a room and you happen to see somebody from that culture perhaps having sex with their sister, don't pass judgment. Just leave them alone. This is what they're being told. Can you imagine that happening in World War II? If someone had, walked up to MacArthur or Patton or, Terry, Terry de la Mesa Allen. He was one of our most gung-ho generals at the time during the course of that war. If they had walked up to any of those people and said, all right, when we get to Germany or if you get to Italy or Germany and you see this going on, just turn a blind eye to it and pretend it didn't happen. They would have pretty much given someone a knuckle sandwich and then told them to get out of their sight. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. So it appears Bergdahl is going to walk. That means when you're up there checking out all of the fancy shops in the Sun Valley and in Haley area, Bellevue, you'll be able to pass him on the street and say, hey, good job. That's wonderful. Yeah, hey, glad you're home. We've got some guests coming up talking to us about a very important effort they're doing to help raise money for some people, artisans in poor countries around the world. That's on the way.